Buenos días, bienvenidos todos. Esta es una actividad asociada, como decía Dieter, a nuestro Centro de Economía Sustentable y Cambio Climático. Y desde luego uno de los componentes de esta de este centro es el Corporate Leaders Group, el grupo de líderes corporativos para el cambio climático. En realidad es contra el cambio climático, y me parece que es muy apropiado tenerla acá en facultad. Nosotros hemos estado participando activamente en la creación, o sea, hemos estado desde el principio de la creación del grupo de líderes para empresariales, y estamos muy orgullosos de ser parte de esta iniciativa, que convoca a una veintena de empresas muy importantes, las más importantes del país, que están tomando conciencia acerca de los impactos ambientales y de cambio climático de sus actividades, y tratando de mitigar los efectos que estas actividades puedan tener sobre el medio ambiente. I'd like to thank very especially Yvon Chouinard for being here, and his lovely wife Melinda, who is sitting back over there. We're very pleased and proud to be able to host your talk today. Estamos esperando la llegada del ministro de Economía, señor Pablo Longueira. Nos pidió que empezáramos, y quiero agradecer a las autoridades del Gobierno de Chile aquí presentes por el apoyo que le están dando a esta actividad. También quiero saludar muy especialmente a los pequeños empresarios que están trabajando con nosotros en el proyecto FONDEF, de formación de competencias financieras, dirigido por nuestro profesor Claudio Bravo Ortega, quien los va a saludar a la salida de esta reunión. Como decía, esta es una actividad del Corporate Leaders Group, el grupo de líderes corporativos, que este es un programa que está copatrocinado por el Reino Unido, la Embajada del Reino Unido en Chile, la Cámara Chilena Británica de Comercio y la Facultad de Economía y Negocios de la Universidad de Chile. Bueno, yo no quiero alargarme mucho, porque la verdad es que ustedes no vinieron a escucharme a mí, sino que a Yvon. Todos queremos escuchar a Yvon. Solo resaltar que la compañía de Yvon, Patagonia, es un ejemplo de lo que aspiran a hacer muchas otras compañías, y nuestro grupo, por supuesto, de líderes empresariales están en eso, que es un negocio, una empresa que apoya la sustentabilidad. Yo sé que a Yvon no le gusta mucho esa palabra, pero no sé cuál otra utilizar en este momento. En negocios que son amigables con el medio ambiente, productos que no destruyen el medio ambiente, que economizan recursos naturales, etcétera. Ahora, este tipo de productos, este tipo de negocios, son los negocios del futuro. Y lo digo no porque, ¿no es cierto?, sea un asunto moral, sino que va a ser un asunto de hacer buenos negocios. O sea, los consumidores en el mundo entero, particularmente en los países desarrollados, pero cada vez más incluso en nuestros propios países, están demandando productos distintos. Están demandando productos que sean amigables con el medio ambiente. Entonces, las empresas que logren producir estos productos, que logren suministrárselos a los consumidores, son las empresas que se van a quedar con los mercados. Entonces, yo creo que es muy importante, desde un punto de vista de nuestra propia actividad, como formadores de futuros empresarios, formadores de futuros emprendedores, Eso es lo que pretendemos hacer en esta facultad. Por supuesto, formamos también economistas y a muchos otros profesionales, pero el fuerte nuestro es ser una escuela de negocios. Entonces, para nosotros, este mensaje que nos trae Yvon es absolutamente esencial, porque es mirar hacia el futuro, hacia dónde se está moviendo el mundo. Y él es un gran pionero en esto, y le quiero agradecer muy sinceramente estar con nosotros hoy día. Bueno, los dejo de nuevo con Dieter, que les va a indicar cómo vamos a seguir trabajando esta mañana. Gracias.
Muchas gracias, decano, por sus palabras. Realmente en esta facultad de la Universidad de Chile hemos creído que hay que cambiar la manera de hacer economía y de hacer negocios, los dos ámbitos de esta facultad. Pensamos que en economía, por ejemplo, si las empresas no contabilizan lo que contaminan, los recursos de agua, por ejemplo, que usan, cómo contaminan el aire, etcétera, etcétera, en sus balances, esos balances están incompletos. Esto no lo han dicho solamente personas aquí en Chile, sino que también alrededor del mundo muchos economistas están hablando de una contabilidad con estos aspectos, incluyendo estos aspectos, porque no podemos saber si un negocio es rentable o no si es que no contabilizamos los bienes libres, es decir, los bienes que, como el aire, que uno puede echar una chimenea al aire y no contabiliza cuánto vale eso para el resto de la sociedad. Por lo tanto, en la facultad estamos comenzando con estos temas en economía, y en el mundo de los negocios estamos incluyendo todos estos temas en los programas de negocios, en los MBA, en los diplomas, digamos, para los posgrados, para que los empresarios, los futuros empresarios comprendan que los negocios que son sustentables son los únicos negocios que van a ser rentables en el futuro. Por lo tanto, tenemos esta serie de eventos que partimos hace ya un par de años y fuertemente este año con la visita de Yvon para conversar sobre cómo una empresa puede sobrevivir en el futuro. Creemos que las empresas que no consideran a los consumidores de este nuevo milenio no van a poder seguir subsistiendo, porque ha venido un cambio radical desde que llegó el Internet. Vamos a partir con la presentación de Yvon. Yvon tengo una larga presentación de él acá, pero yo me leí su libro, así que lo conozco bastante bien. Hoy día tuve el honor de conocerlo personalmente. Es una eminencia viviente de este tema. Fue de los primeros empresarios que partió escalando montañas, ¿no es cierto?, rocas en California, y vio que al llegar a una roca para escalar, se encontraba con una roca que ya estaba llena de clavos para subir esta roca, para poner las cuerdas, ¿no es cierto? Y dijo, esto no me gusta, y desde ahí partió diciendo, hay que cambiar las cosas, y creó los primeros clavos sustentables, por así decirlo, que eran reutilizables, que tú después de escalar los sacabas y dejabas la roca tal como la encontraste. Con este negocio partió en el garage de su padre, haciendo estos primeros aparatos, digamos, para la escalada. Y como tuvo tanto éxito, esto ya formó una compañía con equipo altamente sofisticado para escalar roca, montaña. Después empezó con chaquetas que sean más livianas, porque cuando uno sube una montaña y hace frío, una roca no puede llevar mucho peso, ¿no es cierto? Porque uno, más encima que soportar el peso de uno, tiene que soportar el equipamiento que lleva. Por lo tanto, fue creando nuevos equipamientos especializados para estos deportes. Pero siempre con una mirada de sustentabilidad. Estoy hablando hace más de 40 años, 50 años, cuando nadie pensaba en estos temas, que contaminar era gratis y que no importaba porque los recursos eran realmente inagotables. Surfista, además, de California, igual que muchos de ustedes aquí en la sala, fue creando también temas, ropa para surfistas, y en general siempre con el tema de sustentabilidad. No quiero seguir dando tomándome más la palabra, pero creo que la filosofía para crear los negocios y cómo él ha tenido éxito en los negocios nos hace pensar al resto de los empresarios de cómo poder sobrevivir en estos nuevos tiempos donde el Internet, donde los blogs, el Facebook, etcétera, está cambiando la manera de llevar los negocios. Por eso creemos que es muy importante pensar distinto, que los directorios de las compañías, de los gobiernos corporativos tengan en cuenta estos temas y no sean solo radicados en una gerencia, sino que es la supervivencia de las empresas. Y para eso tenemos a Yvon Chouinard para contarnos su experiencia. Y para completar nada más esta pequeña introducción de Yvon, porque podría hablar por horas, les quiero pasar un pequeño video de una de las acciones que lleva Patagonia en el mundo.
We're part of nature, and as we destroy nature, we destroy ourselves. It's a selfish thing to want to protect nature. I never intended to be a businessman. We made the world's best climbing equipment out of here. We realized that putting in and taking out of all these pitons was causing damage to the rock. So I made these little soft aluminum chocks that you just put in with your fingers. And I'm a dam buster.
We've been working for years to take this dam out. The reservoir behind it is only 4 feet deep. The water gets real warm, kills a lot of the life in the river.
When you take out a dam, that's a real victory. I mean, a concrete victory, so to speak. I get an idea to do something, I like to take the first step. If that feels good, I take another step. To do good, you actually have to do something.
Bueno, ese era un muy pequeño y cortito video, pero un poco lo representó lo que les había contado. Bueno, vamos a nuestro plato principal. Después tendremos un foro con Matthew Ballard de PricewaterhouseCoopers, que nos va a entregar datos duros de cómo se comporta la empresa en Chile. Y también nos va a acompañar el doctor Mena de Fundación Chile, que también nos va a dar un contexto para que podamos discutir con Yvon y nuestros invitados sobre estos temas. Yvon, please, it's all for you. Creo un gran aplauso para Yvon, por favor.
Well, it's a real honor for me to be here. I first came to Chile in 1968, driving from California, surfing all the way and finally climbing mountains. And I've come here many, many times. In fact, I was just in the south a few days ago, and we did a 4-day kayak trip down the Baca River, camping out, and I can tell you it's the most beautiful river I've ever seen. At any point in our 200-kilometer descent, you can turn around and see 360-degree views of the most beautiful mountains you've ever seen. So this topic that I have today is a very difficult one. I've never spoken about it before, and in fact, at my company, in our catalogs, we're starting a multi-year effort to address this question of what would an economy look like that doesn't destroy the planet. And we're going to have some very smart people from different universities doing essays about this. So today I don't have all the answers. I just have a few ideas that I'll share with you. This last year I saw the birth of my first grandchild. And I worry about what kind of world that she will be living in the future. When I was born, there were 2,500,000,000 people on the planet. When she will be 38, there will be 9 billion people. And she will be bearing witness to the 6th great extinction, where we humans are responsible for the extinction of some fantastic species of animals and valuable indigenous cultures. And there's no doubt that we are destroying our home planet right now, and it's the only planet that we have, the only one we will ever have. So, to answer that question about an economy, well, first of all, it has to be a responsible economy. I hate that word sustainable because there's no human economic endeavor that is sustainable. Everything we make, everything we do ends up with more pollution than with the final product. So I prefer to use that word responsible. So the corporations will have to be more responsible, governments will have to be more responsible, and we will have to be more responsible. But then the bottom line is this one word: growth. We're going to have to talk about that problem, growth. So I'll start out talking about responsibility because I've been trying to run my company as responsible as possible for the last 40 years. In fact, this is our 40-year anniversary. So, you know, I started out as a blacksmith making these pitons, and I made a better piton. The ones made in Europe were made out of very soft metal. They were meant to be used only once because the European attitude towards climbing mountains was you conquer the mountains and you make them easier for the next party. So you leave all your pitons in place and ropes and slings and make it easier for the next people. Myself and my friends were brought up with the naturist philosophers in the States like John Muir and Henry David Thoreau and Emerson, and we believe that you climb the mountains and leave no trace of having been there. So it's a different attitude. So I decided to make pitons out of better quality that could be used over and over again. So you put them in and take them out and then leave. Well, that worked fine for a while, and then there got to be so many climbers putting in these hard steel pitons into the cracks that we were destroying the very rocks that we were climbing on. So I've always believed that if you're the cause of the problem, then you are also the solution. So we decided to get out of making these pitons and go into making these little aluminum chocks that you can put in and take out with your fingers. And it was very hard to convince climbers who have been used to pounding these big spikes into the rock with a big hammer to trust their lives on these little aluminum chocks that you just put in with your fingers and take out with your fingers. And so I've always believed that there's only one way to lead, and that's by example. So myself and another fellow climbed a very difficult route on El Capitan without any hammers and without pitons to show that it could be done. So I grew the business, and pretty soon we had 80% of the climbing business in the States. We basically redesigned every single piece of climbing equipment. I'm not an inventor, I'm kind of an innovator. I take existing products and try to make them better. And I started getting into making clothing because there was no money making climbing equipment. It was a labor of love. and there were so few climbers. So I got into making clothing, starting with some hardcore clothes for rock climbing. And that got to be very successful because our philosophy of design was that something is perfected not when you no longer can add anything to it, but when you can no longer take anything away. So we were making clothing with the principles of industrial design, which no one else had ever done before. And so anyway, the clothing business took off and very successful. And then about 20 years ago, we opened a store in Boston, Massachusetts, our own Patagonia store, and it was an old building, and we retrofitted the building. And we put in all the clothing, and we opened the store. Within 3 days, the employees were complaining that they were getting sick. They were having headaches. And so I closed the store, brought in an environmental engineer, and he said, your ventilation system is not working properly. It's recycling the same air, and you're poisoning your employees. I said, wait a minute. Where is the poison? He said, well, it's on all that clothing you have in here. He said, all that cotton clothing has formaldehyde on it. You know, and formaldehyde is the chemical used in biology class to preserve animals in a jar. And he said, all this cotton that is stay press, wrinkle free, all has formaldehyde on it, and it's toxic. And I had no idea because I was just blindly in the clothing business. I would call a fabric supplier and I'd say, hey, come by. I want to see your fabrics. Oh, I like this. Give me 10,000 yards of this. Not thinking what went into making that fabric. And, you know, I seriously believe that most of the damage caused to the environment is caused unintentionally by ignorance. And we were ignorant of what we were doing. So that's when we started asking questions. Okay, so this cotton, to make it good quality so it doesn't shrink and wrinkle and stuff, you have to put chemicals on it that are toxic. And in fact, formaldehyde is still being used in hair salons for straightening hair. Put it right on your skin. So we started asking the first question. Okay, so what should we be making clothing out of if industrially grown cotton is toxic? So we went around to where they grow cotton, and we realized, forget the formaldehyde, just the process of growing cotton is so toxic. It uses up 25% of the total pesticide use in the world and only occupies 3% of the world's farmland. And some of those chemicals that are used like for defoliating the cotton plant so the mechanical pickers can pick are the same chemicals we sprayed on Vietnam. And if you go to a cotton growing area, it's a death zone. There's nothing alive there. There's no birds, there's no insects, there's no bees, nothing. It's a dead zone. Well, I said, I don't want to be in business if I have to use this product. As it turned out, of all the different fibers that you can make clothing out of, industrially grown cotton is the worst. So I gave my company 18 months to completely get out of using industrially grown cotton. And thankfully, there was a replacement, which is organically grown cotton. However, there was none available. A few companies had tried it, but they failed, and there was none available. So I had to go to the farmers. We had to co-sign loans to the farmers because they couldn't get loans from the banks if they grew organically, because the banks are, you know, in league with the chemical companies. But in 18 months, we completely converted the company over to only using organically grown cotton. Well, that kind of answered one question, but then you can't stop asking questions. So how about the dyes that are used to dye cotton? Are they toxic? We didn't know. There's no books about this. So we found out with our investigations that some dyes are toxic. You use different dyes for polyester than for nylon, than for cotton, and it's very complex. And we found out that, yeah, some cotton dyes are very toxic, and so we found a company in Germany or somewhere that made non-toxic dyes, but then some colors were still toxic. So we couldn't do those colors. So, okay, so now we're using non-toxic dyes, but where is this dyeing going on? Is it just a big outfall from the dye plant going into rivers? Well, that was the case. Like this shirt is Portuguese flannel, made in Portugal, and all the dye houses are on one river, and a dye house takes water in, dyes the cotton, and then it goes back into the river. And then another dye house and another dye house. Down near the mouth of the river, the last dye house can't use the water because it's black. So then they had to bring in some very sophisticated cleaning machinery where they have to clean the water before they use it, then they dye the fabric, and then they clean the water before it goes into the river. So that's the dye house we use now. So in other words, if you educate yourself, you're left with choices. The uneducated person has no choices in life. And my company exists basically to put into practice what all the smart people say we have to do to save this planet. I mean, I couldn't care less about being a businessman. I never wanted to be a businessman. But I'm very concerned about the fate of the planet. So we exist to put into practices, to ask questions and make the right decisions. So we've taken questioning our supply chain all the way to the farmer, all the way to, okay, when you make a t-shirt, it uses, I don't know, 70 liters of water to make a t-shirt. Well, is water just water? No, it's not. It makes a big difference whether the water comes from a dam that maybe created a lot of damage in its by destroying a river. How about water that comes from a well where the water is millions of years old, fossil water, and it's being deplenished? Like underneath the central United States we have an aquifer called the Ogallala Aquifer. And all the water for all the corn and the grain that we grow in middle United States comes from that aquifer, irrigation. And it will be completely depleted by 2030. How about that? So, or, you know, is the cotton grown in an area where it rains? So we have to buy our cotton from an area where there's natural rainfall. I mean, I can go on for hours about how we clean up our supply chain. And I can tell you that it's leading an examined life in business, asking all these questions, and then it's really a pain in the butt. Well, I wrote a book recently called A Responsible Company, where in the back of the book is a checklist of all the things to think about if you want to be a more responsible company. But in the end, we're still net polluters. And I feel like we have to do something about that. So for many years, we have taken 1% of our sales, not our profit, but our total sales, and we give those to environmental organizations. So this last year we gave money. I usually don't talk about what our sales are, but last year we gave $6 million away. So if you're good at math, you'll figure that one out. And we gave it to about 700 different environmental organizations around the world, all who mostly exist to force the government to obey its own laws. And we also started an organization called 1% for the Planet that has about 1,500 companies now that are all doing the same thing, giving 1% of their sales. The other, one of the most important things that we're doing right now, as part of our mission statement, is to influence other companies, because we can't save the world by ourselves. So we have gone, I had a call from Walmart a few years ago, and they said, we need your help. We want to create a sustainability index, kind of like organic standards for food, but a sustainability index for clothing. And we tried to convene a group of the biggest clothing companies to come to New York and talk about this idea. They sent out a letter and nobody came. So they said, would you co-sign a letter signed by Walmart, the largest company in the world at that time, and Patagonia, a very small little clothing company, to come to New York and talk about this. Everybody came, which kind of knocked me out because I realized how much power this little company has. And so we started this Apparel Sustainability Coalition. And what we're working on now is, well, to be brief, it follows the supply chain of every clothing and footwear product, so that in a couple years you'll be able to go to a department store and there'll be 5 brands of jeans, and each one will have a number, and the number denotes how sustainably they were made, the labor practices, the biodiversity involved in making those jeans. And so one will be a 2, one will be an 8, and suddenly the customer has the information to make an intelligent choice. And this coalition now, we started with only 8 companies and now has over 100, and it represents over 40% of the entire clothing and apparel sales in the world. This is the most exciting thing going on, because the sustainability index can also be used for buying a car. It can be used for buying a lawnmower. It can be used for buying, it can be adapted for many things. And in fact, we're trying to talk the European Union into adapting this this index. So what's going to happen is that the companies that are making products that aren't very good quality and are don't have good labor practices and are using toxic materials and stuff, you'll be able to tell. And I can tell you, their sales won't be very good. Every company is making identical products. They're all the same, but the way they're made is really different. So I've kind of give you a little snapshot of what we're trying to do to be a more responsible company. Let me read something that this fellow that works for me, Rick Ridgway, quite a famous climber, first American climber to climb K2, and he's head of our sustainability department at Patagonia, and this is part of an essay that he's writing for our catalog. At a recent forum on corporate responsibility, it occurred to me that all of the presentations were in some form related to innovation. New technologies for renewable energies, for more efficient packaging, for reducing transportation, for reducing toxics, for reducing water usage, for recycling materials. These presentations were from high-level executives representing some of the largest global corporations in the world: Unilever, Walmart, Coca-Cola, Hewlett-Packard. These executives' efforts to decrease the environmental footprints of their companies were genuine and laudable. In many cases, their efforts had been underway for years. Yet, in these same years, every global indicator of the health of our planet has continued to trend in the wrong direction. I leaned over to an executive from Google and told him, in Patagonia's view, the only explanation was that our businesses continued to depend on annual compounded growth, and growth was overriding the incremental benefits from the new technologies. It's interesting no one has mentioned it, I said. He nodded and replied, but everyone knows it's the elephant in the room. I just read a book recently. It's in French, and it was about 40 companies that have been in business for over 200 years. So how could they stay in business for over 200 years? If I grew my company, say 15% a year now for the next 20 years, it would be a multi-trillion-dollar company, which is impossible, of course. So I realized that their overriding values were, number one, quality. They were absolutely committed to quality. They were committed to innovation. And they were committed to restrained growth. So, what is preventing society from controlling its growth? Controlling population, controlling the stuff that we buy. What is it? Is it the greedy corporations that are trying to shove these things down our throats? Is it the empire-building governments? You know, an uncontrolled growth in a human cell is called a tumor, a cancer. And it leads to death. You know, species evolve and die off. Empires rise and they break apart. Businesses grow, then fold. There are no exceptions. And often, the faster the growth, the quicker the death. Excuse me here a second. Well, if you probe deep enough on why we can't control growth, you'll find that the problem is us. We're the problems. You know, in the States, I don't know about Chile, but in the States, we're no longer called citizens. we're called consumers. And if you look in the dictionary, a consumer is one who uses up, who destroys. The stock market goes up and down according to our level of confidence. And we're the ones telling the corporations to make these products, make them as cheap and as disposable as possible. I mean, look at the Apple iPhone. They make it so that you can't repair it, purposely, so that you have to buy a new one if you drop it in the toilet. Very, very irresponsible behavior on the world's largest corporation. In fact, there's a little company in San Luis Obispo, California, just these young people that have figured out how to repair iPhones. And it's driving Apple crazy. We last year we came out with an ad just before the busy shopping season for Christmas, a full-page ad in the New York Times, the national edition of the New York Times, and it was a photograph of our jacket, and it said, "Don't buy this jacket." And in the copy it said, "Before you just run off and buy this jacket, think twice. We ask you to think twice. Do you really need it, or are you just bored?" You know, most of the consuming that goes on is mindless consuming. You're not even thinking about what you're doing, you just buy something. And I think one of the problems that we can't face up to this destroying the planet is, and the problem is us, is that we're like alcoholics who refuse to admit that we are alcoholics. And of course you can't do anything about your addiction until you can admit to people that you are an alcoholic. And until all of us are able to say, I am the problem of destroying the planet, nothing will happen. But if we can admit to that and start changing our lives, corporations will have to change. You know, I used to think that designers had the most power in the world because they decide what color car you're going to drive, what your clothes are going to look like, you know, and with their advertising, they control you completely. I used to think they had all the power. But you know what? You can say no. So ultimately, you have the power. You can say no to all that stuff that is unnecessary. You can say no to the banana cutter. You know, I just saw a little banana cutter that you peel a banana and you flip it down and it cuts it and it replaces a perfectly appropriate knife. So what's going to happen if we all consume less? Isn't the world economy going to crash? It probably will. But it's going to crash anyway. You know, we've known since the Industrial Revolution that machines destroy jobs. And now we have robots, we have computers. There won't be enough jobs for all of us, no matter what. So, how about this dilemma where the economy crashes? Well, somehow I think the answer lies with one more word, besides quality and innovation. It lies with the word simplicity. All of us leading a more simple life. And I can tell you that is so difficult. Everything in life forces you to become more complex. And to reverse that is very, very difficult. You have to learn the word no. I've done a lot of different sports in my life, and I've always believed that to master a craft or master a sport, you have to work towards simplicity. Like the artist, the illustrator becomes an artist when he can do his paintings more simply. And it really pleases me to see young climbers now going up and doing a climb on El Capitan in Yosemite that took me 10 days to climb, putting in multiple pitons and hanging out in hammocks, and now they do it in their gym shorts and they're back before lunch. How about the surfers who are now paddling into the biggest waves in the world, where 5 years ago they were towing in with machines? I know a hunter who hunts elk every year, and he started out with a high-powered rifle with a telescope, and he found, oh, that's too easy. So he started hunting with a bow and arrow, and he found that too easy. So now he goes and he puts a elk skin over his body, rubs the elk musk all over so he smells like an elk, and he walks up to an elk and spears it, just like a caveman did. So the more you know, the less you need. And how about an economy based on handmade goods and based on, let's take, for example, agriculture. The green revolution in agriculture is actually a disaster. In the long term, it's polluting the planet. It's causing huge algae blooms in the oceans. It's not sustainable. So how about going back to organic agriculture, which employs people, makes topsoil instead of destroying topsoil, doesn't poison the land and oceans, and in the end creates superior products? Somehow I think that this is what we have to think about. We're not going to solve the world's problems with more and more technology, with more complexity. And, when you think about, if the economy crashes, what are we going to do about all the poor people? We have to bring all the poor people up to our standard of living. I don't think so. I think we have to bring the rich people down to a lower standard. And that's all of us. We're all rich. So, I can just say that I don't know what's going to happen with my new granddaughter, what kind of life she'll have to deal with. But all I can say is I'm going to try to make sure that she has, just like her parents did, has a life in nature, because you protect what you love. And if you have a life in nature, you'll want to protect this planet. Thank you.